Hi, everyone. My name is Bianca Garcia, and I am the Associate Conservator of Paintings at the Balboa Art Conservation Center. My pronouns are she, her, hers, or ella, and I will be your moderator for today. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the ancestral homeland of the Kumeyaay Nation. The Kumeyaay peoples continue to maintain their connection to and care for this land. Welcome to the third of 4 sessions for Preserving Chicana, Chicano, Chicanx Art, Conversations on Conservation. This program is a collaborative effort between the Balboa Art Conservation Center, the Centro Cultural de la Raza, and the many wonderful participants who have graciously joined us through the month of April to open a dialogue on what art conservation and cultural preservation looks like for the Chicanx community. This program is funded by the California Humanities and the City of San Diego Commission for Arts and Culture. And today's topic is Inside, Outside, Preservation of Chicana, Chicano, Chicanx culture within and without institutions. In this session, we will explore what the role of institutions is in conserving and preserving Chicanx art, how institutions go about acquiring and or exhibiting works by Chicana, Chicano, and Chicanx artists, and how this affects their preservation, and what kind of resources institutions need and have access to help them achieve their collections and preservation goals. Joining us today, we have Dawsey, who is the Senior Curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art in San Diego. Esther Fernadez, who is the Artistic Director of the Cheech Center for Chicano Art and Culture. We have Roberto Hernandez, who is the Board President of the Centro Cultural de la Raza. And we have Leticia Ranco, who is the Executive Director of the Balboa Art Conservation Center. And all will contribute and we will learn from their experiences in their respective institutions. I would like to share a little bit more about each of our participants, and I will start with Jill. Jill's pronouns are she, her, hers. And prior to her position as Senior Curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego, she held curatorial posts at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art and the Utah Museum of Fine Arts at the University of Utah. Dawsey is the co-curator of the Nikki de St. Paul in the 1960s, which is co-organized with Michelle White of the Mineral Collection in Houston, and also curator of the Yolanda Lopez Portrait of the Artist, the first solo museum presentation of the work of the late artist and activist Yolanda Lopez, who passed away last year. Her past exhibitions include Being Here with You, Estando Aquí Contigo, 42 artists from San Diego and Tijuana, which was co-organized with the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego Associate Curator Anthony Graham. The uses of photography, art, politics, and the reinvention of a medium, Laugh in Art, Comedy and Performance, and Approximately Infinite Universe. In addition, she has organized solo exhibitions with artists including Scolia Costa, Edgar Arsenault, Andrea Chung, Eve Cohen, Coulter Jacobson, Adriana Lara, and Javiera Siemens, amongst others. Born and raised in San Diego, Dawsey holds a BA from Bryn Mawr College, a PhD in art history from Stanford University, and was a Helena Rubinstein Fellow in Critical Studies at the Whitney Independent Study Program. She has taught curatorial practice at the California College of the Arts and art history at the San Francisco Art Institute, UC Irvine, and the University of Utah. Thank you for joining us, Joe. Next up, we have Esther Fernadez, whose pronouns are she, her, hers. And she is the inaugural artistic director of the Cheech Marine Center for Chicano Art and Culture of the Riverside Art Museum. Formerly the chief curator and deputy director of the Triton Museum of Art in Santa Clara, California, Fernandez has curated numerous groups and solo exhibitions, including Chicana, Spiritual Reflections, or Reflexiones Espirituales, and Consuelo Jimenez Underwood, Welcome to Flowerlandia. In 2019, she co-curated Chicanx Futurity? With Carlos Jackson and Dr. Susie Cepeda at the Jan Schramm and Maria Manetti Schramm Museum of Art at UC Davis. Fernandez is currently working on a major retrospective, Archaeology of Memory, Amalia Besa Baines, with Dr. Laura Lopez, set to open at the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive in 2023. She was the recipient of the Standing Committee on Education American Association of Museums Multicultural Fellowship, the Smithsonian Latino Museum Studies Program Fellowship, and a member of Silicon Valley's Multicultural Arts Leadership Initiative. In 2018, Fernandez received a California Arts Council grant to advance her research on curatorial practices and their impact on representation and access for the Chicanx community in contemporary art museums. She received her BA in Chicano and Ethnic Studies from UC Berkeley and her MA in Visual and Critical Studies from California College of the Arts in San Francisco. Thank you for joining us, Maria Esther. Next up, we have Roberto Hernandez, whose pronouns are Yawan and Yawantin, and he is the board president of the Centro Cultural de la Raza. Dr. Roberto Hernandez is an associate professor of Chicana and Chicano Studies at San Diego State University and current chair of the National Association for Chicana and Chicano Studies. His research, publications, and teaching focus on the intersections of colonial and border violence, the geopolitics of knowledge and cultural production, decolonial political theory, social movements, Chicano indigeneity, and comparative border studies. He's co-edited the anthology Decolonizing the Westernized University, Interventions in Philosophy of Education from Within and Without, very appropriate for today's title too, and is the author of Coloniality in the US-Mexico Border, Power, Violence, and the Decolonial Imperative. Dr. Hernandez also coordinates several advanced international research institutes for junior scholars, such as Decolonizing Knowledge and Power in Barcelona, Critical Muslim Theories in Granada, and Latin American decolonial and feminist thought in Mexico City. Lastly, he is a volunteer handyman, janitor, curator, gardener, and president of the Board of Trustees for the historic Centro Cultural de la Raza in unceded and occupied Kumeyaay territory, AKA San Diego, California. Thank you so much for being with us, Roberto. And last but not least, we have Leticia Gomez Ranco, who is the executive director of the Balboa Art Conservation Center, and whose pronouns are she, her, ella. Leticia is an arts administrator, an advocate, and cultural producer. Her work is rooted in the intersection of culture, representation, and social justice, all values that play a role in her current position as executive director for BACC. She previously served as senior arts and culture funding manager for the city of San Diego, where she led the city's art and culture funding program, oversaw the development and implementation of professional development, technical assistance and capacity building to incubate and build capacity of artists and arts and culture organizations in support of the department's diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Before that, Gomez Ranco served as director of programs for the New Americans Museum, where she supported the grand reopening of the Immigrant Narratives-based institution and led curatorial efforts. Her career in the arts began as exhibitions director for Casa Familiares de Front, a collaborative of arts, culture, design, and urbanism, where she oversaw development and program management for multiple art spaces, as well as headed a rigorous and culturally conscious exhibition calendar with a commitment to local arts, diversity, and community empowerment. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of California, Berkeley in English and Chicano Studies, and a Master's of Arts in Curatorial Theory from San Diego State University's Liberal Arts and Sciences program. She's also a two-time fellow of the National Association of Latino Arts and Culture Leadership Institute. Leticia remains steadfast in her commitment to use her experience in arts administration, development, and curating to increase access to the arts for all communities. So thank you all so much for joining us today in this conversation. Before we begin, I would like to invite everyone to use the chat space to share all of your ideas and curiosities. Our goal for these conversations is not to find answers, but rather to instigate questions. We are in investigation mode, and meeting here today is an informal way to dialogue about some of these curiosities. Please share any additional questions or topics that come up during the conversations, and we will be compiling these into a kind of cabinet of curiosities and use these to guide and inform what additional conversations, conferences, gatherings need to happen for these conversations to move forward. Needless to say, this is only the beginning. We're very happy that you are all virtually joining us, and please send all your questions and comments. We will be compiling these in a document that is going to be a living document that will be updated after each session, and we will make them available through our website for all of you to review. So this session is being recorded and will be shared. With that, let's get started on our panel for today. So we've had some really great conversations over the past couple of weeks with artists and scholars, and we've covered some great topics like Chicanx cultural identity, art production, documentation, and what I found most exciting is contextualizing art conservation through this Chicanx lens. We've taken the opportunity to demystify conservation and discuss ways in which the field of conservation can better serve and be responsive to BIPOC communities. Today, we are excited to have the opportunity to talk about Chicanx art and conservation and how these two topics intersect inside of institutions. We will have, as I introduced before, we'll have Jill Dawsey from the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego, Esther Fernadez from the Cheech, and Roberto Hernandez from the Centro Cultural de la Raza. This is a great opportunity for us to learn about your institutions, your roles, your collections, and the work that you do there. And all three of you are affiliated with very important spaces. So we may also have the opportunity to demystify the museum life for our audience, or the various paths that one can take to play a role in these cultural institutions. So let's start by talking about your spaces, and can each of you tell us a little bit about the institutions you're affiliated with? You're all in a pretty big moment at your respective institutions, so this is particularly timely. Jill, let's start with you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Bianca and Leticia, for inviting me. I'm so honored and excited to be part of this conversation with everyone. And it's fitting because we were saying before we started the conversation that we're coming to the close of the Yolanda Lopez exhibition. Closes this Sunday at the Museum of Contemporary Art's downtown location. And Maria, Esther, and Roberta were both interlocutors on the exhibition and supporters, each in different ways. And I'm really grateful and happy to be sharing space with you today. It is an exciting time for us at the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego. We are a museum, one museum with two locations, and we just had the grand reopening of our newly expanded flagship in La Jolla, which has this amazing oceanfront location, and has been closed for a few years, undergoing expansion, which was designed by the New York-based architect Annabelle Seldorf. It's really celebrated for her light-filled spaces and sensitivity to showing art. We also have an incredible downtown location where MCA occupies the former baggage terminal of the historic Santa Fe train depot. And this is where Yolanda Lopez, Portrait of the Artist, is on view now. It's actually our free third Thursday, and we're open till 8 tonight. So if anybody wants to head over after this, they can. We are a contemporary art museum, and that means that we are dedicated to the art of our time in all its forms. We define contemporary somewhat generously, going back to 1950. That's when our collection begins. As opposed to other museums that might just serve as exhibition spaces, we are a collecting institution, and we have a collection of more than 5,600 objects at this time. And this was really largely the motivation to expand the La Jolla building. Because due to space constraints in the past, we either showed special exhibitions or we showed the collection, or we were sort of juggling these between our locations. And now we have a new wing dedicated to our permanent collection, which has been just beautifully installed by our director, Catherine Canjo, and assisted by Associate Curator Anthony Graham, and also Assistant Curator Isabel Casso. And then we have a new exhibition hall there, and I'll put in a plug for our first special exhibition, which is Nikki de San Paul in the 1960s. And that is an exhibition that we co-organized with the Manil Collection in Houston. And I mentioned in part because BACC was instrumental in conserving several of the early works in the show. And so in any case, it feels like coming full circle in some way to be here in conversation with all of you today.
Thank you so much, Jill. Maria Esther.
Hello, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of the panel with what is such an important topic. So I'm just really blessed to be here and grateful for all of the work that you do, that you and Leticia do on behalf of supporting institutions like the Cheech that it hasn't opened yet. So anyway, I could tell you a little bit about the Cheech. Cheech Marin, the Cheech Marin Center for Chicano Art and Culture of the Riverside Art Museum is the full name. Cheech Marin donated over 500 works of his personal collection, and that has become the foundation of the Riverside Art Museum's permanent collection. It really has formalized kind of the museum's initiative to acquire major works by Chicanx and Latinx artists. There's a commitment also by the museum to research and promote scholarship of the collection and develop a comprehensive acquisitions plan to address the gaps. So one of the unique things of the center is that it is dedicated to consistently showing Chicanx art and Latinx art. That is what we will be featuring in all its iterations. There's many conversations to be had about what these terms mean and what it means for the center to have the name that it has, to exist where it exists, what its impact will be nationally. We are in the beginning stages. Conversations have been ongoing. We have an advisory committee that we are putting together. But really, I'm just really proud to be part of an institution that is focused on solely exhibiting this work and what can come of that, meaning scholarship, meaning addressing the exhibition gap, creating a pipeline of exhibitions, leveraging museum resources in support of this work, in support of a community that's been marginalized historically from the Contemporary Art Museum. Yeah, so we have this huge collection now that's coming literally next week. And I think what's really exciting about that is we have the potential to really interrogate museum practices and to think about how is it that we want to accept this work? How is it that we want to handle this work? How is it that we want to position ourselves to begin researching this work? And what are some of the things that advancements we want to make, not only in Chicanx art history and Latinx art history, but also in museum practice, and how we're going to do the work that we're going to do. And so I've been in conversation just fairly recently. I would say it was probably one of the first conversations with an organization with Leticia, where we were really thinking about how we can leverage BACC support and Leticia's wealth of experience in thinking about collections management for the Cheech and making this collection accessible. And so we're really on this precipice of doing hopefully something great. And I do feel that sky's the limit. So I mean, some of our obviously our goals are, like I mentioned, showcasing Chicanx, Latinx art, honoring and exploring its continued social, cultural, and political impact, developing a comprehensive and consistent exhibitions program of the permanent collection, of temporary exhibitions, really providing multiple curatorial perspectives, not just my own as in essence, chief curator, even though my title is artistic director, but bringing in guest curators, bringing in opportunities for curatorial fellowships of graduate students, bringing undergraduate students to see this as a potential profession for them. And so we have these very lofty goals. But I think at the core of that is leveraging museum resources to serve this community. Riverside is predominantly Latinx. It's over 60%. We have UCR, which is an HSI institution. And having the Cheech be a space where we can support future professionals, emerging artists, established artists that have not had their retrospectives, and continuing the dialogue consistently, partnering with institutions that want to do this kind of work. So yeah, there's a lot going on here. And I'm hopeful that we can continue these conversations in the years to come, and we can kind of evaluate the work that we're doing, which is really important, and speak to some of the collaborations which are beginning now in a more, in a deeper way.
Thank you. Yeah, like you said, exciting times for all three of you. And then Roberto, please tell us about the Centro.
First of all, thank you to each of you for coming together to organize this series and today's talk in particular. For us here at the Centro, we are currently celebrating our 50th anniversary. It was last year on July 11th, 2021, that marked the 50th anniversary of being here in the current space, this former water tank converted into the Centro Cultural La Raza. And because of COVID, we had some virtual celebration, but we decided that we would do a year-long celebration with all events being organized under the auspices of the 50th. That said, from the very beginning, the Centro was always created as a multi-purpose, multidisciplinary Centro for arts and culture. And that means that we have from painting, ceramics, woodwork, theater, you name it, right? All across the different types of art. And the mission of the Centro is to promote, preserve, educate, and create Chicano, Mexicano, indigenous and Latinx art and culture. So, we have this multi-pronged approach to the work that we do. One of the things also, just hearing Maria Esther about the Cheech is that sometimes people don't realize the extent of which the creation, not only of the Centro, but Chicano Park also went hand in hand with the creation of Chicana and Chicano studies as fields of study. And here in San Diego in particular, City College and San Diego State, where I teach now, were very much intertwined in their early creation, all four spaces. So we try to continue that tradition as a multidisciplinary, multi-pronged center. And that means that we have not only gallery space, but active dance classes, other programming, book talks, film screenings, you name it. We do a lot of different things. And we also have our own private collection. I couldn't tell you just exactly how many pieces we have in our private collection. I'm sure we'll get a little bit more to that and why that is a little bit later. But just last thing I want to say, just by way of introduction, is that here at the Centro, we were created in the moment, in the midst of social struggle, in the midst of the Chicano movement. And in the late 60s, early 70s, you have over 50 or so similar centers that are created across the nation, primarily in the Southwest, but not exclusively so. Many of them mostly cultural centers to varying degrees, also having exhibit or gallery spaces. However, as much as, it's beautiful to share that history, out of those 50 plus organizations, I would say there's a handful, maybe 8 to 10 that continue to exist. So in that regard, we're both much established and older center, but also a historic one that itself is arguably, in need of preservation. And part of how we do that is through the continued presentations and exhibits, such as our next forthcoming one called Tlali Nantli, Conexiones con la Tierra, Connections with the Earth, which in some ways, is featuring multiple artists, including Gina Paricio, Celia Rodriguez, among others, and in part a continuation of the Chicana Futurities exhibit that was mentioned previously. And then lastly, this coming July, after the Tlalinantli show, we will be having a first ever solo exhibit. As best as we know, there may or may not have been a smaller one done in the Bay Area, but definitely the first time ever here at Centro, where we'll be exhibiting the work of Guillermo Aranda, who himself was one of the founders of Centro, does mostly mural work. In fact, although the Dualidad that you see behind me was a collectively done mural, including over 8 artists who worked on it, it was under the directorship of Guillermo Aranda that Dualidad was put together. So we'll be having a presentation, a solo exhibit of his work, including a lot of blown up high quality photos because one of the things that he specializes on has been outdoor murals. So we'll bring a little bit of his outdoor murals here into our space as well, so people can see that. And that one will essentially be the show in June ending the first week of July. So we'll have a closing for that. That will be not only the closing of his exhibit, but really bring to a close a year-long celebration of our 50th anniversary. We figure what better way than to come full circle to some of the early founders.
Thank you. Again, so many exciting things. I think you've talked, the whole idea of inside outside keeps coming up in each of our panel discussions. So I'm looking forward how we can explore it maybe in our fourth, we'll see. And you talking about the physical space, like being historic and needing preservation as well, kind of also reminds me of what we were talking about, revitalization and Chicano Park murals, and how the act of continuous use, and for them it was repainting, but for you it's to continue in the same space, sort of keeps it alive and preserves it. So thank you all for sharing all of that about your institutions. And I would like to know more about your roles now. Each of you serves very distinct and important roles at your spaces. You're a senior curator, artistic director, and board chair. So I would like for you to tell us a little bit about your role there, keeping in mind that there may be some future cultural leaders listening. So any knowledge that you can share about what this work is like, what it's like to work at a cultural institution, what other roles you engage with, and maybe what your favorite thing is about your role. So let's start with you, Maria Esther.
Wonderful. Yeah, so my first job in the museum was over 17 years ago as a curator of education, developing ed programming and other community outreach programs, which is the initial point of contact with the museum for disenfranchised communities. My training, I have to say, my training in Chicanx and ethnic studies, coupled with the on-the-job training, were pivotal in recognizing the ways in which we as museums professionals can perpetuate marginalization by adhering to practices that don't recognize, that don't understand, and that don't make room for cultural differences within the institution. That to me is what informs the work that I do. I think that when I was promoted to chief curator and deputy director at the Triton Museum, and now of course as artistic director of the Cheech, I was daunted by the responsibility that came with having the power to make decisions, to make programming, to create programming, to make budgetary decisions, to allocate resources to projects. It wasn't enough that as a Mexicana, Chicana, to be in that position, that representation is not enough. The task was to create equitable ways to engage community. Equity, as I mentioned, does not mean representation. It means bringing folks to the table, to provide opportunities where we can leverage the museum resources for communities to be able to tell their own stories, to have agency, to support the cultural production in these communities. This requires a constant evaluation and accounting of what we do and how we do it. It means creating time for meaningful engagement in community around program development, not just in terms of expanding your audience, but leveraging resources to compensate community members, from artists to students, educators, to collaborate with you, to work with you. This kind of engagement is really what excites me most, and came from my experiences in Chicanx studies, and came from my understanding of how institutions function, and came from being part of an education department. Yeah, so I mean, I tend to approach my job very big picture, because I feel that that's kind of what motivates my day to day, is if I can kind of hold true to that space and walk in a good way in holding these tenets, then I'm hopefully making a change, right? Because I do work within a huge mainstream institution. So, and my partner works at the university as an academic. And I've always really looked at the parallels, right? And you know, Roberto, I know you're at San Diego State, and we've had, you know, hopefully a lot of folks here that are work at universities. And you mentioned also the struggle for, you know, Chicanx studies at these institutions. And to me, the museum has a long way to go. in terms of creating these inroads at the institution. And so I look to that, and I look to the Chicanx Arts Org that came out of the Chicano movement as informing kind of the work that I'd like to see happen, that we'd like to see happen at the Cheech. That we are a museum in a way. We are a center, but we're a museum with the responsibility for a collection, to create access for the community this work was intended for, to create an incubator, to find more equitable ways of engaging. I mean, and I keep kind of going back to those things. And while it may be repetitive, it's really what I think kind of centers my day to day. And we are in a position to make decisions. I have a lot of decision making that I get to do in this position that I'm in. And so where do I choose to allocate resources and what projects? And that can't just fall on me. So collaboration to me is key. In my curatorial work, collaborating with, I've had the privilege to work with many living artists. I've cut my teeth and I've been trained with Chicanx artists in the Bay Area. I've been blessed to have, Celia and Yolanda and Amalia and, as mentors, and that comes with a lot of responsibility. I believe profoundly in mounting beautiful exhibitions where our work is treated with care, where our community is brought in to engage with the work, where we are hopefully creating a space for the continued research and scholarship. So I don't know that I've answered your question, but I really do feel like my position comes with a huge responsibility. And if I'm not cut out for it, then I can't be doing this work, because it's really a commitment to the community. And I certainly know that the panelists here feel that way, in my work with Jill and her communications with Yolanda, and honoring how Yolanda wanted this work to be in the space. I know what Roberto has done at the center. I had the privilege to go, and I know you will all speak to the work that you do, but I had the privilege to go this summer, I think in June. Actually, I was offered the position when I was there. When I was there at El Centro, and I was so inspired in thinking about my work in museums, right? And how El Centro is a model for museums. We really need to rethink how we work within the museum model. And so anyway, I digress. I don't want to continue, but this is kind of what keeps me going as we're dealing with construction and fire inspections and collections arriving or not arriving and meetings with stakeholders. It's that I'm hoping that this center can be a space for us to do the kind of work that we can support El Centro, that we can work with El Centro. This exhibition that's coming to El Centro is featuring artists that were in Chicanx Futurity. We should be there supporting them. We should be doing that. So that's my hope, that we can do that and leverage resources, because we can't do anything without money, and that's real. And museums have a stronghold on that. And Jill, we'll laugh at that, right? We definitely don't have an exhaustive amount of resources, but we definitely have more than the Chicanx arts organizations that have struggled out of the movement, right? That some are now defunct, but have created an important foundation of work. So there you go.
No, that was perfect. It was inspirational, aspirational, and descriptive of, I think, all of your journey and like what you bring to the position. That was wonderful. Thank you. Roberto, you follow up to that.
I was going to say, maybe I'll just pass it back to Maria Esther. She was doing so well on Centro, so gracias for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, first and foremost, I mean, I should say, right, my job is technically at San Diego State as a professor of Chicana and Chicano studies. Here at the Centro, we're all volunteers currently. Yet my wife and I, we were talking just recently, and we're kind of tallying up. We're usually here at least 40 hours a week, so it's like a practically a second job, and more than anything, it's a labor of love, and as a professor, first and foremost, I made it a point to come here to Centro to engage with Centro, both first myself as a participant in many activities here, as a danzante practicing here, but also coming to events here, volunteering here, and only in the last 4 or 5 years joining the board and taking it a step further. But throughout that process, one of the things that brought me to Centro that I've done was I started organizing events here, and I even started bringing and hosting some of my San Diego State classes, my community studies classes, which are held specifically here out of Centro. Many of my students have been present throughout some of these talks that you've been having. And I would be remiss too if I didn't mention that I noticed also present with us are some past directors of Centro, and past curators, artists. So want to acknowledge their presence as well. But that being said, being that the Centro is always that multidisciplinary, multi-pronged space tied to the creation of Chicano studies and the park, those things go hand in hand. Some of the creators here were the very first instructors in Chicana and Chicano studies. So for me, it's about bringing it full circle. It's about using the space not only to exhibit the artwork, but also to be a space that actively creates, that actively produces, that actively embodies what it is meant to be beyond the exhibition space as a community cultural center where we learn by doing, and so my students can attest to, in some of my classes I get highly theoretical. Here I say, okay, we could do some of the theoretical stuff, but here in the community studies, we're going to do some of that, and then we're going to do quite a bit of hands-on, hands-on learning. And so that's, broadly speaking, thinking about the vision of what this space was when it was created. At some point itself, we used to have to have a publishing house here out of Centro. We haven't had that now for several decades, but on a personal, that's one vision that I'd like to try to bring back in terms of getting us to that holistic approach to arts and culture, where in essence it's about our praxis. It's about all that we do. We can talk about art as exhibition and the different pieces in our collection, also as artifacts. But frankly, for us, the art itself is our expression. The objects we have here, those are armas. That's how we walk in this world in full, with full integrity and embodied in our true holistic and spiritual selves. That's what the Centro has been from in terms of its own beginnings. Perhaps you could say it's aspirations, but it's precisely with those horizons in mind that I've taken on some of this work, and not just myself, but rather, as I said earlier, in the last few years, we've been operating on donations and volunteers, and a whole lot of corazón. That people refer to the Chicano Park as the ombligo. I'd like to think that's the ombligo, acá está el corazón, and that's part of the jointness of these spaces, right? The entanglement of these spaces. Y CCS, Chicano Studies, se puede decir el cerebro, but frankly, I don't even recognize those distinctions, I think the three go hand in hand as a collective whole.
Thank you so much, Roberto, for all of that, and also kind of bringing together an understanding of how all these spaces are connected and their importance. Now, Jill, please.
Well, that's hard to follow. I was going to describe my role in a slightly more straightforward way. But as a museum curator, something that I often hear, I feel like curators are always, focusing on the Latin root of the word, which means to care for. And so this idea that historically the role of a curator was one who cared for or tended to objects in a collection. And I do conceive of my role in terms of care. I think about it not only in terms of caring for objects, but caring for artists, caring for audiences and communities. My role does involve caring for the collection, but I wear a lot of other hats as well. I'm part of a team. I'm always part of a team, always working collaboratively. Part of a team that works to build and refine the collection, and we supervise collections care and conservation. We can talk more about what that looks like. One of my main responsibilities is to organize exhibitions. So I conceive of exhibitions, I initiate them, budget for them, plan for them. And these could take many different forms, from historical exhibitions that look at a particular artist or moment in time or theme, or on the other hand, solo exhibitions with artists that might involve a new commission or a more monographic retrospective, or even a more focused show, as with Yolanda Lopez. Between our two museum locations, we're always looking to balance and diversify our offerings. So we try to really approach our program in a very holistic way. Again, I'm working with a team. We have registrars who catalog and look after the works, and preparators who are experts in installing the works. I work very closely with our education and engagement department to develop interpretive materials and public programming, and also to imagine new forms of community outreach. That's something that's also we work really closely with our communications team on. I think we've been making a lot of progress there. Work closely with advancement, that is our fundraising department. We collaborate on grant writing and donor stewardship. And then I just was also going to mention that, DEAI work or IDEA work is a really important aspect of what I do. And at this kind of transformational moment for our institution, as we're working to become, a more welcoming and inclusive place, and also more accessible, that's become a really important part of my role. So that's meaningful. But you asked about our favorite aspect of the job, and mine is working with artists. I think artists are always the most exciting thinkers. They're always paving the way, and working with ideas before we see them emerge in the culture. And so I see my role as working on behalf of my institution to advance the artist's vision and their interests, and in turn to ensure that that vision is legible and meaningful to the audiences around us here. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So let's talk about bringing art and the artists. Let's talk about some of the collections and exhibitions and Chicanx artwork that you get to work with. Roberto, let's start with you. The Centro Cultural de la Raza has a permanent collection, a really amazing and impressive collection, and it hosts many exhibitions throughout the year. Tell us a little bit about the role that the Centro plays as an exhibition space, some of the works in the Centro's collection, and how the Centro grows and maintains its collection.
Yeah, so I realized as you asked that question that I didn't even speak precisely to my role here at Centro, but it's related in the sense that as board president, I'm more dealing with the hands-on, like logistics, keeping the building operation, paperwork status, all of that. Unfortunately, given that although I have the title, we try to operate here more collectively. We also rely on a number of other, not just volunteers, but a number of other committees and subcommittees that compose the structure, including the Arts Advisory Committee, which is the one that takes the lead on deciding exhibition and programming. So although I'm not technically part of that, I do get to chime in here and there. But you're right. I mean, we have an amazing collection here, and true to the history of Centro, our collection runs the gamut from screen prints, posters, lithograph, photograph, ceramic, traditional oil acrylic paintings, slides, even film. I mean, we have an extensive collection of old film film that is something that is not only in need of preservation, but digitizing. And we're talking going back to, not just video 8, but I don't even know the name of some of the actual formats of film. That's how old they are, 8 tracks and prior that we have here. So there's so much, that we've maintained over the years, and really when it comes to the question of our facilities and preservation of this amazing and beautiful items that we have here, that's when I direct you all to our GoFundMe page, right? And I say that half jokingly, but I say it in the sense that we have been trying to both through campaign, but also through seeking grants to build up more of a community archival space to shore up our facilities, because as much as we have great items here, we don't necessarily have the most apt facilities to be storing such precious items, right? It's because of that reason that decisions were made, many years before me, that our own special, our own archives, I should say, are held at UC Santa Barbara. They're in UC Santa Barbara in the SEMA collection, California Ethnic Multicultural Archives, and they and that our collections from 1970 through 2000 are there. Here on site we have 2000 to the present, as well as items from 70 to 2000. And so the question has come up, what do we do with these items? And while from archivist standpoint, in conversation with Salguereña, who put together an amazing collection there at Santa Barbara, he was frank with us and said, we'd rather have everything at the same place, but we understand completely how, there's also the need to have it locally. Many people always ask, why are your items in Santa Barbara? And I think it speaks to the history, not only of, say, UCSD, but even my own institution, of not really recognizing the value of Chicana and Chicano art, and why conversations like this are so important, why the idea initiatives that Jill mentions and other efforts at other institutions that are doing this now finally, right, are crucial. So now we're in a place where we do have that interest, that recognition, and so we're in conversation about these archives, for whether we partner up with a local institution, or, as I said earlier, try to apply for community archive grants to help us develop further our own capacity and capabilities here in terms of the actual physical space, because after all, this was a former water tank. So if you want to talk about humidity control in a water tank, I mean, it seems a little bit oxymoronic to do so, right? So we have quite the task, but definitely not the shortage of items in our collection that are definitely worth the preserving and continuing to exhibit.
Thank you. And we put the link to the GoFundMe page on chat so everyone can contribute.
Hey, I was kidding, pero gracias.
Yeah. Moving on, Jill, can you tell us a little bit about MCASD's efforts to collect and or exhibit works by Chicanx and Latinx artists, and maybe share a little bit about what the collecting process entails? So how does an institution acquire a piece? What's the process? What happens when the work becomes part of the collection?
Well, our collection is broad. It's international in scope. We have certain strengths in art from California and from the San Diego Tijuana region, and art of the Americas more broadly. The collection goes back to 1950, as I said, and we're often associated with our strengths in West Coast minimalism, the light and space movement. I have a neighbor kid knocking at my door, and it's interrupting my train of thought, so I'm gonna just take a second. Could you come back to me?
No worries. This happens in the age of Zoom. We will move on to what I said. Okay, so like I said, we are all very excited about the big opening of the Cheech in June. And can you tell us about the collecting mission for the museum? I know we touched upon this a little bit, but kind of going to broader picture here. What is the museum's collection now, and how do you foresee the collection growing over the years? And anything that you can share about upcoming exhibitions or ideas for exhibitions?
So so the Cheech Marin collection is the gift, which is a subcategory. Did you want to go ahead, Jill, and continue?
Why don't you, and then I'll jump in after.
Okay. The Cheech Marin collection, which is the gift that I mentioned earlier of over 500 works, is part of a larger collection of the Riverside Art Museum. So it's a subcategory. I am responsible for, well, really, with my colleague Todd Wingate for the entirety of it. But my focus, of course, is the Cheech Marin collection, the gift, as well as other Chicanx and Latinx holdings that the museum has, which are going to become another subcategory called the Cheech Center Collection. And the reason for that is so that we can really be laser focused on those works in the collection through the work of the center. In what I'd spoken at length already about researching and kind of engaging the artists, which we have a lot of work to do on that. One of our kind of, we're just very candid that there are gaps in the collection. All collections have gaps. And, you know, they're really, no museum can say that they have an encyclopedic collection, especially given that a lot of BIPOC artists are not included in, you know, larger mainstream institutions. So the Cheech, of course, the Cheech collection and the Cheech Center collection, we have gaps and we're fully aware. Cheech is aware, we're aware. And so part of our goal, along with exhibiting and researching what we have, is with the advisory committee, once it's in place, and with the research that we are beginning of the collection and the other holdings in the Riverside Art Museum permanent collection, is to develop a comprehensive acquisitions plan. We have been approached currently by other collectors, donors who have works that want to have their work be part of the Cheech Center collection. And so we are in our acquisitions process where we write it up, it goes to committee, we discuss it, and there you go. Most recently, we were able to purchase some works. We are actively fundraising. We have some monies for acquisitions, and we're looking to expand that. It's not a lot. Cheech continues to collect, of course, personally for his estate, but also in now thinking of the center, and thinking about what perhaps some of the needs for the center are. I am proud to say that recently we were able to, through generous donations, purchase work by Judith Hernandez, who was sorely missed, in the collection. Very excited about that. I have some images, if I can share screen. It's not by any means, it's like, 10 works. So it's not by any means, just a little sneak peek. Let me know, can I, okay, let's see if I can share. I'll be really quick. I'm just super excited to show Jill, particularly one of the newest acquisitions, but from a generous donor.
Leticia is running tech here, so.
Oh, okay, here we go. I got it. Okay, let me make sure I share correctly here. Okay, share. Here we go. So we have, of course, well, here's the Cheech Center, Jacinto Guevara. I do want to say, give a little shout out to Cici. I was looking at the list of participants. Cici Segura, she's part of her work. Soy Chicana is one of the pieces that we've really used in our marketing, and she's been so generous with us. And so thank you for joining us, Cici. We have Jacinto's work. We have Margaret Garcia. I guess I should put this probably. Can you see that? Maybe I should do this. Here we go.
Yeah, we can see the images.
Margaret Garcia, Carlos Almaraz, of course. We have quite a few of Carlos's work. Sandra Romero, We have another one. I just threw another one of Carlos in there. And then this is one of the two recent acquisitions, Juárez Quinceañera by Judith Hernandez. We also have Arrest of the Paleteros by Frank Romero. And then I can't even begin to tell you, Jill, when I started to research the collection, this was a donor had approached prior to me starting in August. They had purchased this work after it was published in the Femme magazine. And so we are in the process of acquiring the work, and had to say it gave me a moment. So it's in the collection at the Cheech. Very excited at the Cheech Center collection to have this Walking Guadalupe, which is near and dear to my heart. So there you go. Yeah. So this is a teaser of some of the works that we have. As I mentioned, we definitely have, let me get my notes back up here. We definitely have more work to do to make sure that we are representative. We are not an encyclopedic collection. We have artists that don't identify as Chicanx in the collection. We have artists that are identify as Mexicanos, as indigenous, that identify as Latinos because they're from Central America, or, and those are the important conversations, because Cheech and his collecting, really the work resonated with him and his experience, and kind of sees a shared experience within the community. Obviously, my job as an educator at the museum is for us to kind of complicate the views of what we're going to show. And so I'm just excited about the potential there. We continue, as I said, to fundraise. In terms of exhibitions, you'd asked, we have definitely about 130 works that will be shown in the first iteration of what we're calling Cheech Collects, which is part of the gift, as well as some works from the estate. We'll have a second iteration that will open in December, because we want to try to include as many of the artists as we can. We have over 100 artists represented in the collection. We also, of course, want to have a narrative, right? We're telling the story since in this inaugural exhibition, not only of Cheech as a collector, but of what this important collection has contributed in terms of visibility across the nation, internationally. It has toured to over 50 institutions in a span of 30 years, which is really quite impressive. He has knocked on doors, and really his goal for collecting was not to amass works, but was to make sure that it's being seen. And one of the things that struck me in my initial conversations with Cheech is that he has an unwavering belief that Chicanx art is the most important, significant art form in American art history. I mean, there was something kind of awe-inspiring about being kind of in the presence of someone who's just like unequivocal about it. He's just, this is the best art that talks about a human experience that we can all relate to. And so, I take those words very seriously in terms of caretaking for the collection, but I also understand that we have other work to do as well, which is to add to that, right? So yeah, there you go. Just exciting times, I guess. And I look forward to collaborating with Jill, and I look forward to collaborating with Roberto and with you, Leticia, in ways of connecting our organizations and doing some really great work together. So Jill, I wish I'd known we'd had that.
Thank you so much, Esther. That's so exciting about all these new acquisitions. And also thank you so much for pointing out the misnomer of encyclopedic collections. That is some food for thought. Thank you. Jill, let's go back to you. So I'll repeat the question. Can you tell us a little bit about MCASD's efforts to collect and or exhibit works by Chicanx and Latinx artists, and maybe share a little bit about what the collecting process entails? So how does an institution acquire the piece? What's the process? And then what happens once the work of art becomes part of the collection?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm blown away hearing about all the acquisitions of the Cheech, and in particular, this early Guadalupe study. It's probably her first, and Yolanda herself didn't know where it was. So that's just, I am blown away by that. And we have a long relationship with Cheech and his collection have had a couple exhibitions here at the museum of those works over the years. I think I was starting to say, that we are often associated with our strengths in, work from the 1960s and 70s and West Coast minimalism, the light and space movement, but particularly since the late 1980s and into the 90s, we've placed greater emphasis on Latinx art broadly. And works often enter our collection through exhibitions. That's often a moment when we're able to make purchases. And we could look back to certain landmark exhibitions like the 1993 exhibition La Frontera, the border art about the Mexico-United States border experience, which was co-organized by MCASD and Centro Cultural. So there's a precedent for these collaborations. And that was a show that included Yolanda's 1985 installation, Things I Never Told My Son About Being a Mexican, although we didn't acquire it at the time, but there were other things acquired from that show. And knowing that institutional history in part led to my own desire to seek her out. I'm just going to mention that show was organized by Madeline Grenstein and Patricio Chavez, and our current director, Catherine Canjo, also worked on it. And it was under the direction of Hugh Davies at the time. And Hugh in the 90s, I think, if I'm getting my history right, I think he really noticed that Secut in Tijuana, although it had an incredible contemporary exhibition program, it's not a collecting institution. And so since that time, we have made, a really concerted effort to collect the work of artists on, both sides of the border, and to, we adopted a binational mandate to consider audiences on both sides of the border, part of our constituencies. But more recently, it was my former colleague, Alana Hernandez, who, I really have to credit with arriving, 3 or 4 years ago now, and really studying our Chicanx holdings. And she put together an exhibition called To Tame a Wild Tongue, Art After Chicanismo, which was brilliant. And it really looked at our collection and understood it in terms of work coming after the Chicano art movement and looking at works from the 80s forward in a more transborder context. And I think it helped me to see that although we have work by artists such as John Valadez, actually Cheech made a significant gift of a major painting to us years ago, we don't have enough historical work. I mean, this is often the case that we are looking to, fill in historical gaps, but we've been exploring these works as a priority for the collection. We have our wish list and sort of, in any case, this is, what led me to visit Yolanda. As far as the acquisition process goes, 80% of the works come into our collection as gifts or donations. And in this case, these are often, these are works that our community collectors have acquired. Sometimes they collect works that the museum can't. And other times, they come to us and they're surprises. Every work that we consider goes through a curatorial evaluation process to determine if the works are aligned with our collecting goals and with the mission of our institution. The other 20% of works are identified for purchase by our director and our curatorial team. And those are brought forward to our collections committee. So we have a collections committee that's composed of board members and other community members who supervise our activities, and they meet on a quarterly basis. We identify works for purchase according to priorities that we've set out, and want to make sure that the work not only aligns with our collecting goals, but it builds on the collection in meaningful ways. We want to be sure that we can meaningfully present and contextualize the work, and that it is addressing gaps or needs in the collection. So we make a presentation, the works are voted on, and the museum, I should also say, has an endowment. So we have an acquisitions endowment. We take a very small percentage as our draw each year, and those are the relatively modest funds that we have to work with. It is much more than other institutions have, but for us it feels relatively modest, and we really have to prioritize. once a work is accessioned, it is assigned a number, and I can really geek out here on this process because I love looking at accession numbers, because the first part of the number is the date that the work enters the collection. The second part of the number is its place in the sequence of objects that enter the collection in a given year. And so we had, kind of a brief pause in our purchasing activity during COVID, and the first work that we have acquired this year is Yolanda Lopez's Runner on My Own, which is the last work in her Runner series. It's a 12-foot wide painting that is, among the most transcendent in the exhibition, and so we're so thrilled that through this exhibition it led to an acquisition in the end. What else was I going to say? When we received the work, we assigned it a number, we assigned it a location. Our registrars do condition reporting to assess whether it's exhibitable. Can we put it on view? Does it need framing? Does it need, what are the needs? We have a running list of works that require conservation. And so that's, we can kind of talk about conservation separately. But, we want to make sure that the works are stable and protected. Every work is tracked in our database, and then it's stored safely and appropriately, whether that's in an archival box or on painting racks. And we have a large storage facility that is made up of 3 warehouses, and we have a painting vault and a paper vault and a larger sculpture area, and everything is climate controlled and checked on frequently, and that's the process.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question for you, and it kind of worked out perfectly that there was that interruption and Maria went first and brought up Yolanda's work, because this is a question about the Yolanda exhibition. So you recently curated this landmark exhibition for the Chicanx community, Yolanda Lopez, Portrait of an Artist. And Yolanda is such an important figure for the Chicanx community, and her work is of utmost importance. Can you share with us a little bit what it was like to work on this show, the curatorial process, selecting the works, visiting the artists, that whole process?
Yeah, I would be glad to. I had been curious about Yolanda's work for years, and Leticia and others have shown it here in San Diego, and and I had encountered her work in histories of feminist art in graduate school, and knew she was from San Diego, that she'd long been in the Bay Area, but that we also had this small institutional history going back to the La Frontera show. And for me, those were the reasons to seek her out. But she wasn't easy to reach. I mean, she wasn't using email very often, as Esther knows, but I wrote to Galleria de la Raza, which is an important space in San Francisco that she had a long history with, and they put me in touch with her. I'm kind of giving you the play-by-play, but I reached out to Yolanda, and she invited me to come and visit. And so as I alluded to, I did have in mind an acquisition initially, but when I went to visit her and learned that she had never had a museum exhibition, well, she's been in plenty of museum exhibitions, but never a solo show. That suddenly became the priority. And Yolanda was already ill at that time, and so we started talking about it, and she said, "Jill, you have to hurry." And so we were able to fast track it, and I went back to San Francisco, and I had a friend, and Yolanda had a friend, and I know Esther was there on one of these visits, but we unpacked a lot of works that were in storage in her basement to determine what was there. And I was astonished. I mean, many of these works have been shown over the years, but others had not. And it was clear that many were in need of conservation, although not all. She kept many works in her apartment, and they were pristine. But her large scale works, I mean, she had no choice but to store them, rolled. There weren't many options available to her. And so, we knew that the work was going to need a certain amount of conservation. And at that point, we made several trips, and on one of the trips, our registrar flew up there with me, and we spent 2 days kind of, assessing and doing condition reports. And then her work was taken to Karen Zucker's conservation studio, which is she's a paper conservator in Oakland, a really renowned paper conservator. And so at first we weren't sure if we would be able to conserve all of the works. We were just going to have them assessed. that was the moment at which the pandemic hit, and Yolanda's large-scale works on paper ended up spending the pandemic in Oakland undergoing conservation. And because we had this longer period, we were able to go more in depth and also treat her paintings on paper. And we had to get sort of creative about this. We don't build in conservation to every exhibition that we organize, but we applied for a grant. We actually received a grant from California Humanities for our programming, but because we received that other grant, it kind of allowed us to focus some of our exhibition funds on the conservation, and that's how we were able to make it work. After that, the process of organizing the show, is a lot of long phone calls with Yolanda, and she was involved in every aspect of the decision-making process. It was clear that we didn't have enough time to mount a full retrospective, and that was the reason we chose to focus on the 1970s and 80s, which was, Yolanda always described it as this kind of compendium of her work from this period when she was really embracing Chicana feminism. She was in fact theorizing Chicana feminism. This was, so it was a key moment for her. I was always concerned that people would, think this is the only period in her work in which she was prolific because she made so much other work, but this is what we felt like we had the time to, really focus on. And so I hope it, inspires future exhibitions, but I'm trying to think of what else I wanted to share with you, but maybe I'll pause there.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we'll get a chance to revisit a few other things, especially conservation related, which leads us to our next kind of general topic. We're using these conversations to create different points of intersection between Chicanx cultural identity and production and the field of conservation. Now that we've learned about your spaces and roles and your collections and exhibitions, let's talk a little bit about the role that conservation and preservation plays. Connecting with last week's conversation, we talked about how Rascuache art can pose some challenges to institutions, both from an exhibition and a collecting standpoint, given the oftentimes ephemeral nature of the materials or even the use of organic materials. And Rascuache art can sometimes stand in opposition to things like what is appropriate way to engage with art inside of institutional spaces, things like pest management policies, or even the training and bandwidth of museum staff. Do these pieces influence how you approach your work, and considering the effort of institutions to diversify their collections, does the increased presence of these works call for a shift in policy and practice at institutions like yours? Esther, I would like to start with you.
Yes, certainly. My master's thesis actually was about this topic. It was about, I was looking at Celia Herrera Rodriguez's work, and what I had curated a show in 2009 called Chicana Spiritualities. And she was in the show. We had Patricia Rodriguez, Viviana Paredes, Consuelo Jimenez Underwood. We had a lot of just great artists that worked with organic materials. One of the pieces actually that Viva worked with had Chile powder. And you can imagine we would come the next day to work and there were little footprints and things, and we knew we were having to increase our pest management. And I was not the chief curator at the time. In fact, in 2006, I had been asked to be part of the curatorial committee, department, excuse me. And so excited, I'm now part of this. The executive director at the time, George Rivera, was very, very, just a great mentor, and gave me the opportunity, said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I really want to do this show looking at kind of indigenous and spiritual practice and the museum. And so we did. And of course, Celia came in with Willow. We had to call the fire marshal to turn off the alarm so that we could burn copal and do a ceremonia before her installation, private, a private. And the chief curator at the time, who was a trooper, we had Consuelo carving into the wall to create this wall installation, which was actually the first wall installation that she created. She's a textile artist, but now there's been like 10, at least 10, 15 iterations of that wall installation. So we had drywall work. You can imagine I was pushing this chief curator in ways that I don't think he had ever thought imaginable. And all with support, of course, of the executive director as a new person on the job. So fast forward, right? And now I'm the chief curator at the Triton. I had gone back to school and I was looking at this work and really thinking about, that it's our lens, right, as curators. So if we have an artist that's coming in or we're looking and has the potential to, I mean, I don't want to be so candid, but just to be a headache, right? Culturally, there's a cultural dissonance, right, at the institution. We can make those decisions to like, I don't know, this isn't going to work. And so looking at Celia's work and looking at Felicia Montes from Mujeres de Maíz and like Gina Aparicio and Margaret Alarcón, looking at these, mujeres that have done this work that incorporate this practices that pushes the boundaries of museums, it really exposes the limitations in our policies, right? In the ways that we need to adapt. So to me, it's them teaching us how museums need to change in order to accept this work. At any rate, I know we're short on time, so I will stop, but it's important for us to mitigate and really it's decentering whiteness, right? And having these conversations, meaning the way that we think these spaces should work are kind of defined by these Western constructs of what art is and should be. And so we need to kind of interrogate that and we need to mitigate those spaces. And it's uncomfortable. As a museum professional, of course it's uncomfortable. As somebody who has to have an insurance provider and make sure that I have things in place, pests, oh my gosh, near the permanent collection. I know you all at VACC totally get this. And of course, but that's what I find so exciting about spaces like El Centro, who are like, no, this work belongs at El Centro. And we need to support institutions that have these kinds of collections to mitigate some of the things and the resources they need to have these collections safely, but then they can also teach us how we can push the boundaries of what we do so that we can be more welcoming to artists that don't fit our mold. So thank you.
Thank you. That was a great answer. Jill.
Well, I'm losing track of the question a little bit. Can you?
Yeah, of course. So we were talking about how Rascuache art sometimes, just the nature of the materials, oftentimes it's ephemeral, other times it's organic, and it goes against sometimes museum policies or how we interact in spaces, and just generally some of the challenges it can present, and whether this merits the question of, does it affect the way that you carry out your own work, how you approach your work, and considering the efforts of institutions to diversify their collections, because a lot of them are doing that right now, does the increased presence of this type of work then calls for a shift in policy and practice inside institutions?
Thank you for saying that again, since it was a longer question. Contemporary art is made from an array of materials, every imaginable material, and artists have been using found objects and found papers and collage for 100 years, and especially since the 1960s, there's been a greater use of ephemeral materials, organic materials, and also artists who want to challenge the object form or the commodity status of the artwork. And so we try not to let this dictate whether we bring a work into the collection or not. We're looking at the significance of the object and if we can present it according to the artist's intentions, which is not to say that we don't give it great consideration or that it doesn't give our registrars pause when we bring into the collection certain kinds of works. The one that always comes to mind is Arte Reembolso or Art Rebate, which is an installation by David Avalos and Lewis Hawk and Elizabeth Cisco. And the installation includes potted palms. So, every time we bring in palms, it's a pest control issue inside the museum itself. But it's an important work that we want to continue to remount. But I also think of the work of Nikki de Saint Paul, which is on our walls now in La Jolla, and these are works that she created in 1960. You know, they're assemblages of found objects that she embedded with bags of paint and then covered in plaster and hung on a wall, and then she and others shot at them, and the bags of pigment exploded dramatically. But these are, you know, these are so fragile, she literally shot at them. And so, you know, museums, you know, all over are working to try to, you know, preserve these works and stabilize them. And we can only do so much, and to some degree entropy and, you know, that process is built into the works. And so, you know, when an object enters our collection and we talk with artists, you know, we want to know, did you intend for this to be temporal? Did you intend for this to be you know, to fall apart over time? And you know, we try to extend the life of the object and stabilize it. You know, on the other hand, if a work is damaged or if it's undergone decay in a way that's not in keeping with the artist's aims, if it's in truly poor condition, then we need to, you know, evaluate whether it can be shown and whether we have the means for conservation. And that's always a, you know, a conversation as well.
Thank you. It seems like the like contemporary art museums are more adept at handling some of these challenges that other museums like encyclopedic collections or more traditional Western collections are not. Roberto. You're
Yeah, sorry, I had to relocate here. There's always something going on at Centro, and since we were gonna go longer, we actually have a theater workshop starting up soon inside. So apologies for airplanes, buses, and other sounds you may hear. But yeah, I mean, you know, with some of the ephemeral objects, I mean, I think at some level we've made peace with all the creepy crawlers that we oftentimes have around here. But again, right, if we want to preserve appropriately, it really speaks to the need for facilities able to do that. You know, just these last few months, we actually received a major donation of art collector's estate. We're talking 7 pallets of boxes that came to us. A lot of amazing things, from textiles to some paintings, but mostly, you know, ephemeral art, right? Many things of which, as we're looking at it, we're like, how are we going to store this? I mean, fortunately, this was a donation, you know, very generous donation that was given to us, no strings attached. However, you know, we've made the decision, some of it we want to keep in our collection, some of it will be for exhibition purposes, but other aspects of this collection, of this donation, we are gonna try to arrange for some type of auction or special sale where we, you know, unload some of this and essentially transform it into monetary donations for Centro, precisely because of the lack of capacity when it comes to facilities for proper storage. I mean, we're talking items made out of banana fiber, or, you know, a wide array of different material objects that are primarily Mexican folk art, but also represent other Latin American folk art traditions, Cuba, Panama, Kuna Nation, you have it. There's a lot of beautiful things here. So also stay tuned come June and July, when we hope to start trying to make slow releases of some of these objects. Start collecting your pennies now, because there's some really beautiful things, and we wish we could keep it all in our collection, but the reality is that we can't, right? I mean, but nevertheless, you know, we're trying to do as best as we can with what those materials that we do want to keep, because even odd shapes and sizes, you know, I mean, it's not like things that can be easily put away on shelves or what have you, right? It really runs the gamut in terms of at least this specific donation that I'm talking about. But it also kind of is the same with previous donations, right? That are already in our current private collection area. At the risk of scaring Jill and Maria Esther here, well, I think Maria Esther's had a peek. If I told you how they're stored, he'd probably freak out. I mean, yeah, but we're trying with the as best we can with the resources we have.
Thank you. Jill, it's time to revisit the Yolanda exhibition, and we can talk more about conservation now. Can you tell us about the works in the exhibition, what their condition was, the process for preparing them for exhibition, and the role that conservation played in this exhibition? What are some of the preventive measures that museums take in storing and maintaining works in the collection?
Well, this has been such an educational process for me as well. But I mean, I think a few things to say, because we've talked somewhat about the condition of the works and how they were stored. But one of the dominant features of Yolanda's work from this time is their large size, their incredible size. Many of the works are in the show are large scale drawings, 8 feet tall, or in some cases, as much as 12 feet wide. And Yolanda chose a material that suited her vision. So, she loved working on a large scale, but that leaves you very few options. And, where could she find paper that size, let alone paper she could afford? She made her charcoal drawings, the large scale drawings of her mother and of herself, her mother and her grandmother, that are part of the 3 Generations series that you first see when you walk into the exhibition. She made those on butcher paper, right? And so, she wasn't precious about her materials. It wasn't just that, that was affordable. She also was very insistent, that she was a conceptual artist and her materials were, secondary to the idea that she was exploring. But she did want to preserve the works. And we know that, she applied fixative over the charcoal and so she was both trying to, it's a balance between finding materials you can work with and afford and then trying to stabilize them. And she was doing best she could. I was going to say about the runner paintings. These are the large series of paintings of Yolanda. It's another series of self-portraits where she's running. These are oil and acrylic works on paper. And one of my biggest regrets from creating the catalog is that Yolanda had said to me that she created these on butcher paper as well, but they're not on butcher paper. And we know from the conservation that they're on a much heavier stock, perhaps an art paper. And so clearly at the time, she sought out the materials she needed to complete the work that she, to be able to create and display her works. In many cases, she taped larger pieces of this paper together. And I think a lot of artists at that time in the 70s and 80s just didn't know that masking tape would begin to leave behind a residue. And so this is a widespread problem. It's not limited to, artists such as Yolanda, but it was really illuminating to understand that paper can be repaired. I think we often, and I don't need to say this to all of you at BACC, but we often think about paintings being conserved or sculptures being treated in certain ways, but the paper, which needed to be smoothed and stretched, we were able to accomplish that. We were, Karen and her team were, and they applied reversible paper margins to the backs of all the drawings that allowed them not only to be flattened and stretched, but then became the hanging mechanism or the hanging device, so that these works on paper could be wrapped around, a solid substrate. And then our preparators devised these really ingenious hanging mechanisms and large sheets of plexi that stand off from the drawings and allow them to be protected. So it really was kind of, this larger community effort between the conservator and our registrars and our preparators to, think about how to make this work presentable and to show it to its fullest potential. And I'm just really happy that Yolanda got to see it through as close to the finish line as she did. And again, going back to just appreciate Maria Esther's help in so many moments during the show, because she was able to visit with Yolanda and facilitate a lot of the later decisions in confirming the checklist as we were working. So yeah. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Jill.
Oh, I did remember. I was going to say, you asked about like, what do we do to mitigate, or to, you know, I was just going to say that like at our downtown location, we have humidifiers in this space, and those were, we always have dehumidifiers in this space, but this was something new that we purchased specifically for Yolanda's works in this case.
So you were intentionally humidifying the space?
We are, I said
Got it.
Dehumidifying. That's the point I was going to make. But there are, you know, even after the works go onto the walls, there are things that we are always doing to control the climate and to make sure that these works are as stable as possible. Including, you know, we have a case of ephemera, and Centro lent some of their archival materials, that a journal, and so, you know, want to assure them that they're protected as well.
Thank you for those final details. Esther, there is so much that is exciting about the Cheech as the first North American institution dedicated to Mexican American art and to researching and studying all things related to Chicanx art. Can you share with us a little bit about the role a museum like the Cheech can play in developing culturally responsive collections care and conservation practices, training the next generation of Chicanx art workforce, and what the Cheech hopes to achieve in the future? I think we've already touched on some of these things, but it's lovely to hear them again.
Sure. Again, I think having the collection and working with these kinds of works consistently is what's going to, I think, be a game changer for us at the Cheech, and hopefully for other institutions and organizations that we collaborate and partner with. I think as I look at the exhibition schedule going forward, we're partnering with Cal State San Bernardino. We're bringing in, we're doing an artist in residency, or actually they're having an artist in residency where students are creating a collaborative piece that will be on view in our community gallery, that is talking about the Bracero history of the Inland Empire and the railroads. And, you know, and I guess what I'm trying to say is, in terms of, we have opportunities, I think, at the Cheech to create these spaces for learning, whether it's around exhibitions, curatorial, and collections care. I had the privilege of talking with Leticia and figuring out that we had some common experiences, having Celia at you know, Berkeley and our time there. And I think we crossed paths maybe just a couple years, and maybe we even had a class or two, but didn't quite know each other. And in my conversations with her, there's a lot that she can teach us in terms of how we can take care of the collection. And so how do we at the Cheech then forge that partnership, you know, and support the work of the BACC, and have it align with our mission, which is to make the collection, to research it, to care for it. We had talked earlier before the panel started about the Magu sculptures that we have, which are cardboard sculptures, you know, it's off-gassing as we speak, you know, and it won't, you know, I don't know, hopefully it lasts another, you know, 20 years or so. Those are the limitations, I think, that museums have in terms of what does conservation then look like for a piece like that? We start talking about documenting at this point, right? Documenting this work, trying to research as much of it as we can. If the artist is living, you know, we then reach out to the artist to get as much information. I mean, these are the things that I've done in the past, but these are the things that we want to do at the Cheech. And it's central to our mission. I mean, it is our call to action. So that's what we'll be fundraising towards. That's what will be, you know, and this is what I tell a collector or an artist or anyone who's thinking of donating, is when you donate or we're able to purchase a work, this is a work that's not going to go back into the collection and then come out 5 years later. We're really going to be changing the collection repeatedly, looking at the permanent collection, bringing in other works from the community to engage in conversation with the collection, or just creating solo shows and thematic shows from artists in the community, and providing those opportunities for artists who are not in the collection. all of that creates, I think, it generates scholarship. It generates, putting resources towards exhibition catalogs, making sure that we have a record that, if my, daughters or that, if whoever 20, 30 years down the road wants to see that Magu sculpture, we'll have resources for them available to be able to learn about what are some of the materials that artists were using. I mean, Yolanda was masterful in her use of the Xerox machine. There was the one color Xerox copy machine that she talked about, and I can't remember right now where it was, if it was Galeria or if it was, those are 9 by 12 or whatever they are, 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper. She just, that in and of itself, to see all of that work up at the museum, that was her thinking. That is what led to the triptych. We need to be able to document that. We need to be able to show those works. And so I'm really grateful to you, Jill, for putting that up, and now then finding the piece that we have in the collection and seeing how it's in conversation. And we haven't been able to do that. Those of us who were lucky as an intern to, at Berkeley, I got the coveted spot to go and help her catalog her work millions of years ago, it feels now. I got to see it, right? But now everybody can see it in San Diego. And so we need to continue to show this work. We need to show the posters that I had the privilege. I was so excited when you took me up there and we were looking at the prints with you, Roberto, and it was, those works need to be there because it's in the community for, who should be seeing this work. So we need to be showing consistently. And that's what the Cheech, I think, can offer.
Thank you. I think you've touched upon also a previous theme of how preservation, collections care, cultural preservation is also about caring for the people and the community around it, which is a nice segue to the next question for Roberto. And I have a two-part question for you. The Centro has gathered an important collection of Chicana cultural materials over the past 50 years. Can you speak towards what have been some of the challenges and successes of stewarding and caring for this collection as a community responsive organization? And as part of your 50th anniversary celebration, the Centro has been trying to raise funds to support collections care. Can you tell us a little bit about how can you tell us about that process and also how the community can get involved in supporting your efforts?
And hopefully we won't have too much noise while I respond here. But yeah, much as shared, we want to try to make sure that our private collection is not just stored away upstairs, where only a few people see it at a time, if at all, but to have like the active circulation of an exhibition of these materials, right? And so we've very proudly maintained collections, including I'm thinking here among the several that we have of a series of original posadas based on the Posadas' original stamps that we have here that were acquired going back to the 1980s that we still have in our possession. That's one of many prized items here. We have original Patsy Valdez's work. There goes the plane, as well as Magu. I just came across a piece by Magu myself that I had not seen. And so one of the things that we've done talking about documentation is also trying to digitize. There's been a lot of efforts over the last several years to digitize the extent of collection to make it also available in that way. Previous iterations of my classes have worked on some of the digitizing, and it's both on the one hand, the pieces we have in the private collection, but even documenting properly all the pieces we have out here, right? I'm in the outside now. We have, here, murals all along the outside. So we've been trying to properly document, who were the artists, when were they done. The majority go back to 1974 with a few exceptions. So documentation, I think, is key to that as well, and we've tried to do that. But yeah, it's hard to speak in terms of successes. I might have more challenges, but I think I've spoken to that already. So ultimately, I think being the community space that it is alongside the gallery, that's where I think we have benefited a lot, and I would say points also you could say to another type of success, a different type of success, is that despite Centro's challenges, the community has not given up on us, right? And that we say here lately, Centro's de quien lo trabaja. The Centro belongs to those who work it, and that doesn't mean an ownership thing of the people that are here, the ones who run it. No, on the contrary, it's an invitation. It's an expression of our open door policy that anyone in our not just the community, there's no one the community, but anyone across our broad section of communities is welcome here. Is welcome to come. They have a project, they have an idea for an exhibit. We accept open community proposals. So part of our even exhibition calendar is partially created or based not only on what we want to exhibit based on our private collection, but also sometimes even just based on community artists that come and ask about the possibility of sharing their art. In that regard, and I would say another major success that I, for one, cannot claim credit for, but rather longstanding practice here in Centro, is that because of that openness, many emerging artists get their start here. Many emerging artists are able to exhibit here and build that confidence and trust in their own work, get that exposure for their work to then go on and carry on, conduct, build their craft and extend their work far beyond Centro, far beyond San Diego. So I think in that sense, we could speak to many successes that have happened over the years in terms of people who at some point pasaron por aquí, including Yolanda herself and many others.
Thank you so much. And yes, I agree with you. The Centro's continuing presence in its water tank location is definitely a huge success. So thank you all for hanging in there. I know we're running a little bit out of time, but we're over time by now. But I'd still like to share some final thoughts. In the last year, the Balboa Art Conservation Center has begun what promises to be a radical and transformative shift as we center our commitment to equity and inclusion as the core of our new identity. Our commitment to nourish cultural equity and inclusion and the use of the arts as a vehicle to do so positions the important work of art conservation and cultural preservation as an integral part of this success. As the only regional center, the only regional conservation center in the Western region, BACC has a responsibility to foster deep-seated change in both conservation as a professional field and in the access and impact of conservation knowledges to communities that are historically underrepresented in museum collections and the American cultural canon. BACC is committed to shifting the way that regional conservation centers engage with collections and communities. We are putting this vision into practice through intentional inclusive conservation programs, which will extend access to services as well as by supporting training and education opportunities, partnering with stewards of community cultural collections like the ones we have here today, expanding the existing knowledge base to include culturally conscious and responsive methods of conservation, and dialoguing with artists and caretakers of diverse cultural heritage and ancestral collections. These conversations mark the beginning of the road to inclusion. And as a final thought to all of our panelists, I would like for them to maybe share something about the ways in which the field of conservation, BACC, and organizations like this can help support preservation efforts for the Chicana, Chicano, Chicanx community. So I open the floor to whoever wants to jump in first.
I'll just jump in and say, I've really appreciated the collaborations we've had thus far, and really look forward to building more with each of you, not just individually, but as institutions. And part of that, I mean, one thing that comes to mind currently is more our more immediate is that with these donations that we received that I mentioned of the 7 pallets, there's on the one hand, we're trying to reach out now to look for grants for both appraisers as well as conservationists, because at least some of the materials are in need of a little bit of a loving touch, if you will. So there's that as an immediate need, but beyond that, I think just spaces such as this, these conversations, these encounters, as well as continuing exhibits. We want to be able to build our capacity to the point where, we're exhibiting the art, not just here, but even having traveling exhibits of Centro's collection to other institutions. I know in the past there had been the capacity and the financial resources to do that. It's been a long time since any of that has happened. So that means that these treasures, because they are treasures, what we have here, have been sitting here. And have not had the type of circulation that they definitely deserve.
Thank you. Esther, you wanted to share something?
Yes, I think we all have kind of our niche, right, of what we do. And so from the initial conversation with Leticia, I was really inspired at this idea of having a collection. I think, what did you say, Leticia? The Chicanx Collections Care Fellowship, where we can, I can't take credit for that. I have to, it was, I may write it in a grant, but it's totally Leticia. And, but I think it's important that, that we kind of help each other as we can. I know we kind of in our day to day, like, after a day like today, right, in construction meetings and doing, all the things that we need to do to open the center. I mean, this is where the potential for real change comes, is for us, and you all are supporting us in the conditioning that will need to happen for us to be able to open in the amount of time that we have, given some of the delays that we've had, and we'll get there and we'll get to the finish line. But it's working together in those ways that I think I'm hoping we can create an avenue for what we're saying, like this pipeline, right? I mean, El Centro and organizations like that, the Mission Cultural Center, I most recently lived over half my life now in the Bay Area. I'm originally from Los Angeles, but the Mission Cultural Center, the Galeria de la Raza, that's where a lot of these artists, I mean, they started there, right? And started these organizations. And so I see it as kind of a responsibility, really, that we keep these institutions going, because those are the models that I've looked to in terms of my practice, so yeah, we have to support each other. And so you have, so thank you, BACC, for coming out next week to help me get moving on the job that I need to do. And I look forward to, paying it forward once the doors are open. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Jill?
No, I was just going to echo some of that. I also have a similar question, for my own institution and how we can support preservation efforts. But I've learned so much through this series, and I have to thank you for the work that you're doing and raising my consciousness and the consciousness of so many others. And the partner, I think it's all about partnerships and relationships. I think a lot of those partnerships have started in the context of the Yolanda Lopez exhibition, and we see them continuing, especially as the show will travel live on in different ways. And, you know, I think sharing resources as institutions is so important. I'm all about co-curating and co-whatevering, you know, I think that's, we have to collaborate. And so, you know, that's the way forward. And I'm interested in continuing to talk with Roberto and everyone at Centro about how we can continue the partnership that we've started here in San Diego. So yeah, thanks again for including me in the conversation.
Can I add one thing about what you just said, Jill? The curatorial, that's so important, you know, to have multiple curatorial perspectives, like bringing shows from institutions, even if we're an hour and a half. I know that sometimes our communities can't travel to San Diego or can't come up to Riverside, right, in the Inland Empire. And so I think it's important. I think it's important that we share, right, curatorially. And I know that's a taboo, right, in the curatorial world, at least when I was coming up back a while ago. But now I think, you know, we want to provide opportunities for guest curators. Selene Preciado is curating the retrospective by the De La Torre brothers. So she, in essence, is the first curator at the Cheech. I'm super proud about that. She's really cool. The show is going to be amazing. Like, that's awesome.
And we're proud to lend to it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so that's my point. It's like, we would love, you know, there's Amalia's show that's opening at Banfa. I would love to see it come down like here to Southern California. And so I think those are the things that I'm seeing more of a spirit of collaboration in that way, and institutions opening up to more curatorial voices. And that's the way, that's only to the benefit, right, of this, the conversation and the scholarship and supporting artists. So, yeah. Oh, was there so? Oh, yeah. I'm just so terrible at my job. June 18th is the public opening. All the free tickets are gone. I'm so sorry. We that was a free day for the community. But we do have many free days, actually, every first Thursday, every first Sunday. But we have a huge art fair happening that day. We're going to have bands, we're going to have artisans selling. We're going to have Felicia Montes, I mentioned, is going to be doing something in the Zócalo area right outside the Cheech.
Next week, we will be having the last of our panel series conversations. It will be a little different time. It's going to be actually at 9:30 in the morning. And we will be coming to you from Denver, Colorado, where we will be attending the Latinos in Heritage Conservation Conference. And the topic for next week will be A Donde Vamos Chicana, Chicano, Chicanx, setting intentions for cultural preservation. So thank you everyone for hanging in there for an extra 30 minutes. It was really hard and impossible to cut this conversation, but thank you so much for attending today and all your contributions to this conversation, our amazing panelists. And thank you to the California Humanities and the City of San Diego Commission for Arts and Culture for funding provided to support this program. So we hope to see you all again next week.
Thank
Bye.
you.